connect with the Global Network for Folkhögskola Research, I have shared the link to our website in the chat. So just, well, not while we're having the seminar, but later on, please go to our webpage, and you can also sign up as an associate of the Global Network for Folkhögskola Research, which will give you a link to us, and we will keep you informed about our different sessions like this, and seminars. So, Mikael, I will give you the word, and you can maybe present yourself a little bit more before you start your presentation. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Johan. Before I start, just a practical question. Shouldn't Jan-Einar say something about the language?
Yeah. Thank you. I'm very glad that you said that. Jan-Einar, could you please help us a little bit with how, because there are, we should say that there are 3 groups here today. There are those who are more used to the English language, and then we have a group from Ukraine, about 20 people from Ukraine, who have asked to have the session translated, and they will also have specific small groups later in this breakout rooms so that they can share in their own language that they feel more comfortable with. The same thing is about 20 Portuguese speaking from South America mainly, who have asked for small groups in their groups. So Jan-Einar, you can tell us how can we find translation if we need that to Portuguese or Ukrainian?
So hey everyone, we have interpretation today in this seminar, and if you would like to listen to the seminar in Portuguese or in Ukrainian, you have to click on interpretation in the Zoom menu just beside share screen and reactions. Over there you can choose the language you prefer. For the Ukrainians, I have heard that you not necessarily will have the translation today, but I will leave the booth open in case you need it. And for the Portuguese, it's already going on. I'll just say it in Portuguese as well, so everyone can understand me. Para quem quiser acessar esse seminário em outro idioma, a gente tem interpretação hoje para o português e para o ucraniano. É só você clicar no menu do Zoom, do lado de Share Screen e de reações, tem um menuzinho de globinho chamado interpretação, e lá você pode escolher português, inglês ou ucraniano. Bom seminário. Thank you, Johan.
Thank you, and thank you to Jan-Einar, who is the technical host today. And we are, it's a great help that you have taken that role, and for Asava Educativa to take that role. We're very grateful. Yuri, would you like also to say something, maybe to help the Ukrainians find a translation if they need it?
We did not plan to make the translation, so we do not have the Ukrainian interpreter right now. And we will plan that after this English-speaking event, some Ukrainian participants from this event will organize and will be in the event for Ukrainians, for those who do not speak English. Yeah, and I think that is a pretty good way to transfer the knowledge we gather here. Yeah.
Thank you. We can also say that there is in plan a session of both translation of folk high school texts, pedagogical text and history text to Ukrainian. That's part of the Global Network of Folk High School Research work or one of our projects for the future. And these will be connected to 3 seminars this fall and 3 seminars in the next spring. At least that is the plan right now. It's still in the planning place, but it's a way of supporting the upbuilding of the Ukrainian society after the war mainly, but also on the way. So our great respect for our Ukrainian friends that are here today and for the work that you are doing. And we hope that we can work together to, in every way support, not only by guns and political powers, but also by knowledge and sharing dialogue.
Thank you.
So Mikael, now we'll give you the word.
Thank you very much. And thank you very much for a nice introduction. I'm very glad to be here today and to be invited. So once again, thank you to the GNFR. As you heard, my name is Michael Weiss. I'm a colleague of Johan. We're working together at the same university. My background is philosophy and philosophical practice, but I'm also teaching now in a course for folk high school pedagogy, and I also worked at several folk high schools in a certain project that I also will present today. In order to start with the actual lecture, I would like to share my presentation. As you can see here, the practice of dialogue. I think it's a very interesting title, because if you have a closer look at the practice of dialogue, you find the word practice. And with Aristotle, you can say that there is a difference between the activity of praxis, as it was called, and the activity of poiesis. When you're building a house, for example, the activity of building a house is not the goal. In fact, living in that house that you build is the goal. So there is a goal outside the activity. With praxis or practice, however, it's the opposite. It's the activity itself that is the goal. So there is a kind of paradox, as it seems. What is dialogue as an activity with the goal in itself? What can we find in just doing dialogue without having the purpose outside of itself? I will try to give you an idea of what dialogue is about throughout the course of this short presentation. And I also try to relate dialogue and the practice of dialogue to Bildung and Bildung processes as they are practiced at Norwegian folk high schools. So there is a long tradition, in fact, when it comes to dialogue at the Nordic or Scandinavian folk high schools. It was Nikolai Fredrik Severin Grundtvig who suggested dialogue as the central pedagogical method for this type of schools. As you probably know, Grundtvig was the founder of the Nordic folk high schools. Not only that, he was also a famous poet, philosopher, and priest. And for him, dialogue represented the living word. The living word opposed to the dead word, the written word. And for him, the conversation between the teacher and the students was the best way of learning and teaching. So in that sense, we can say that dialogue has a long tradition at the Nordic folk high schools. However, and this is the next question, what is dialogue? We use the word dialogue pretty often in our everyday life, I would say. And sometimes we say, I just had a dialogue with my colleague about the work plan next week. Or I just had a dialogue with my supervisor on my research project. But here the question is dialogue just any conversation? Or is dialogue a specific form of communication? In order to give an answer to that question, I would like to say what I think what dialogue is not. Dialogue is not a debate where the goal often is to win the debate. And dialogue is neither a discussion where the goal often is to come up with the best argument. The reason for that is because a dialogue is not competitive in nature. It is not about being right or wrong. Rather, in a dialogue, it's about looking at a problem, a phenomenon together. And when we're asking the question again, what is dialogue? Then in a quite illustrative sense, it is this what a dialogue is. And now you probably wonder, what does Michael mean with that picture here? In fact, it's based on an old Indian story about the elephant and the blind man. So just imagine a king sending out 5 blind men who, of course, never have seen an elephant before. And the king says to them, go out and figure out what an elephant is. So they are brought to an elephant, and each of them is touching this animal at a different part of its body. So there's one man standing at the trunk, touching the trunk, another one grabbing the horns, the next one touching the belly, another one embracing the leg of the elephant, and the last one grabbing the tail of this animal. And then they're asked, what is a dialogue based on your impression? So the first one says, well, an elephant is like a snake, the one touching the trunk. The next one grabbing the horn is saying, the elephant is like a spear. The third one then, who is touching the belly, is saying, well, an elephant, it's like a wall. The one embracing the leg saying, it's like a tree trunk, or it's like a tree. And the last one saying, well, an elephant is like a brush. And now when you have a look at what they're saying, at their statements, you can say that each of them individually seen is wrong, of course, because an elephant is not like a spear and it's not like a brush. However, when you put all these different perspectives together, you get a better picture of an elephant. You get a deeper understanding. And this is what a dialogue, metaphorically speaking, is about. It's about investigating a phenomenon, a problem, a question together, with the emphasis on together, in order to get a deeper understanding of it. Matthew Lipman, who some of you might know, the founder of Philosophy for Children, also called this community of inquiry. And in such a community of inquiry, opposing and even contradicting opinions are not only allowed, but they're in fact necessary in order to get such a deeper understanding of whatever you investigate. So with that image of the elephant and the blind man, I wanted to give you a kind of idea, not necessarily a definition, but an idea of what the dialogue is, in contrast to a discussion or a debate, for example. Now, when we continue with that idea of dialogue, we come to what can be called a dialogue, or dialogue as a philosophical practice. Here on the screen, you can see one of the first one who used and employed dialogue as a philosophical practice. It was Socrates. And you all know that he was inviting whoever on the market square in order to philosophize about what is courage, what is love, and so on. And in more general terms, you could say philosophizing means to examine general aspects of the human condition. Now that might sound a bit complicated, but to examine general aspects of the human condition, for example, means to figure out what is respect, what is friendship, what is love, what is responsibility, or what is courage. All of these aspects we can relate to. Each of us can relate to the aspect of courage because we experienced courage in our own life. We have seen others who have been courageous. We have been in situations where we lost courage. So we all can relate to that. And the same goes for friendship, for example. We all have an idea of what friendship is because we experienced it ourselves. We have friends, maybe we have lost friends. We know to a certain degree what friendship means. And we all can relate to that and investigate it further. So with that kind of summary of the term philosophizing, I can go over to philosophical practice as a discipline, because in the 1980s, in the early 1980s, a new discipline within the field of philosophy came up called philosophical practice. And what they wanted to do was to bring philosophy back from the ivory tower onto the market square and philosophize with common people. In such dialogues, in such philosophical dialogues of philosophical practice, no philosophical pre-knowledge was required. Anyone could join in such a dialogue. The only thing that was necessary in order to start philosophizing was personal experiences. And this is what we all have. We all have life experience. And this is the starting point in order to investigate certain general aspects of the human condition. In the beginning of this movement of philosophical practice as a discipline, you can say it was, or many philosophers practice dialogue in one-to-one dialogues, in one-to-one conversations. Often people came with a certain life issue, they had problems in their marriage, for example, issues at work and so on. So it had the characteristics of counseling, you could say. And then the question came up within that community of philosophical practitioners, well, are we counselors? Is what we are doing problem solving? And then some would say yes, and others would say no, we are not doing that. If we are true to the term philosophy, the love of wisdom, then what we are trying to do is to promote wisdom and help others to develop wisdom, and also in ourselves. And here is where you could say that this other group, and I also count myself as being a member of this other group, was more interested in philosophical practice as a pedagogical or educational or edifying practice. So it's not about problem solving, but rather philosophical dialogue as a practice to promote the development towards, let's call it wisdom or practical knowledge. And I was starting with that in the year 2010. Pretty soon after I started with that, I was invited to a project at Norwegian folk high schools, which was called Philosophical Dialogue and Democratic Citizenship. And the idea behind this project was to see and use philosophical dialogue as a Bildung practice, because Bildung at the Norwegian folk high school is one of the main goals. The point was we trained several teachers at Norwegian folk high school so that they could facilitate dialogues with their students. And I have seen that one of my colleagues from back then is also here today. It's Camilla Angeltun. Hi, Camilla. We all have good memories of that time in that project. We worked with that project between 2011 to 2018. Here in the picture, you see the beautiful folk high school of Elverum, where we did several sessions with teachers and with students. And I could imagine that you are now a bit curious about what is philosophical practice when you understand it as a Bildung practice. Well, I can give you one example. There was one student there that we met in one of these dialogues, and he enrolled in this 1 year at folk high school because he had fear of traveling. And traveling is an essential and integral part of the life at a folk high school. And at the end of that school year, they would even go to New York, and that was a major challenge for that student. But he managed to go on that journey and safely back. However, it was only in this dialogue after that journey that he realized that he really showed courage and that he could develop courage during this 1 year at folk high school. So courage, if you understand it as a virtue, was one of the aspects that was developed and that the student also became aware of in that dialogue. And when I say became aware of, I also have to mention that folk high schools in Norway and in general, they offer a wide range of subjects. Outdoors activities like climbing, surfing, snowboarding, to photography, theater play, filmmaking, philosophy classes, psychology. So you have a wide range of subjects. And of course, all these students, they make a lot of experiences. However, as John Dewey put it, learning by doing through reflection, which means making experiences alone is not enough in order to learn. You also have to reflect over your experiences in order to develop, in order to learn something from them. And it's here where dialogue, especially philosophical dialogue, comes in. It's a way of reflecting over the experiences that you make at folk high school. And now I have a look at the time. I still have a little bit of time left. And this was just one example with that student who developed courage. Another example would be a student who was more of an outsider. So she never participated in the common meals. She was kind of harsh towards the others, quite rough around the edges, until she once participated in one of these philosophical dialogues where the topic was love. What is love? And all of a sudden, she shared the story of herself where she once experienced love. And that was when she visited her mother at the hospital on Christmas Eve, and the whole family celebrated Christmas there. The mother was severely sick. She actually died only 2 months after Christmas. And for that student to share that story was a major step, because all of a sudden, all the others could understand why she behaved as she behaved. And who she was, the others could start to see her, and she let the others see her. So in that sense, it was a kind of opening up and learning to open up towards the others. And after that incidents, she could more and more integrate in the social activities of the school. She could become friends with others. So here you see that that form of learning is not the form of learning like learning a subject, learning a certain content. It can also have to do with social learning. Know thyself, as Socrates said. And that aspect I also see as an integral part of Bildung. And when we go over now, before I finish, to the last slide, I did several academic articles and research on philosophical practice at Norwegian folk high schools. I was trying to explore the potential of dialogue practices in order to promote Bildung and whether they actually promote Bildung at all. And what I figured out there was that it's mainly two dimensions of Bildung that are fostered with these philosophical dialogues. The first one was self-knowledge. Who am I? What are my weaknesses, my strengths? What are my potentials, and how can I learn to unfold them? So this was one of these dimensions that was promoted through these dialogue practices. The other dimension was what I call existential learning. How to cope with challenging situations and issues in my life, like these students that I was telling about now, who all of a sudden was opening up. And that was, of course, a big challenge for her to share that story. Another one is how can I show responsibility? And when we investigate the topic of responsibility at folk high schools, many students present the situation that they face every week when they have to clean the bathrooms and the toilets at the school. Because many students there would not show responsibility, or they have to realize that this is where you can show responsibility. So this existential learning dimension is the second dimension that I became aware of due to my research at folk high schools when it's about dialogue practices. I think for now I've said enough. I used up my 20 minutes of presentation time. If you want to know more about research that I did, you can find articles on my ResearchGate account. You can download them for free there. The presentation that I used now is also sent to you afterwards, where there is some literature included on the last slide. In that sense, I say thank you very much. This was just a very brief introduction into the topic. For me, it's not so important to overload you with theory. I look very much forward to the practical part today that we do afterwards. And now I'm especially looking forward to your presentation, Gary. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Mikael. And very good to hear your presentation and realize the connection between the existential realization and the personal development and the social knowledge, but also to the democratic building and to the working towards a society and functioning as a part of a functioning democratic civil society. Gary, we are waiting for your story and your experience. I think right now that the view we have of you is frozen.
Is it
Gary?
frozen? Hang on a minute,
Yeah.
I'll turn it on and off again.
So.
Am I still frozen?
No, now you're moving. Good to see you.
Hello
You're,
there. So,
you
share my
can.
screen.
Yes, thank you.
So can everybody see that clearly?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. And thank you, Michael. I really enjoyed your talk there. And actually, you know, reading your work was one of the inspirations for this project. So thank you.
Thank you too.
Yeah, I'm not even lying and making it up. It's absolutely true. So, right. Our project was called the Thinking Folk Project. And it took place last year and involved more than 600 participants. I work for an adult education provider in the northeast of England. So most of the learners that come to us are over the age of 19. We teach adults from over 50 different nationalities. So yes, we teach people who've lived their whole life in England, but Newcastle as a city has got a big immigrant asylum seeker population. So we set off on this project wanting a philosophy project inspired by Socratic dialogues, and I'll begin to explain kind of the journey of how we got to so many philosophical conversations. So a bit like lots of people here during lockdown, I spent time in all kinds of conferences and seminars online. And there was one that I went to, which was around Bildung. And I listened to a lady from Denmark talking about a project called the Danish Storytelling Project, and was very inspired. Because unlike in England, where we were determined to carry on teaching regardless in exactly the same way, in Denmark, what they decided to do was they recognized that isolation was a big problem. And they gathered people together, adult learners, and talked about life, about loneliness, about fear, about all of those things that Michael was alluding to before. In fact, anything that they thought was affecting people during lockdown. At the same time, having discovered Michael's work, I was reading another book called The 6 Questions of Socrates, which again, I found a very inspiring book. And what Christopher Phillips did is that he went around the world, if only I could do this, and he met and gathered groups of people in, well, anywhere other than education buildings. So it could be in a coffee shop. It was on one occasion in a Mexican plaza, and he brought people together and he conducted Socratic dialogues and discussed exactly the kind of questions that Michael was talking about just a moment ago, such as what is courage? So having listened to the Danish Storytelling Project and reading the book, I decided that I would do my own pilot, just me, 6 learners from Bangladesh, Iran, Ukraine. And we discussed the question of vaccinations and whether people should receive COVID vaccinations. And after about an hour and a half of conversation, the whole conversation had led round not to whether we should have vaccinations or not, but to the issue of trust, because none of the people in the class trusted their governments. So yeah, the big theme or the conversation point was trust. But also, what all of the learners said, they all had English as a second language, was that they learnt so much about each other and each other's worlds and each other's experiences that in normal formal classes, they would never find out. And they said that they wanted more. So that's why we did the Thinking Folk project. So this is ground that Michael's covered. So I was completing my PhD and was also taken by Grundtvig's belief that the living word, speech, dialogue should be the primary way that we learn, because in England it's not. But also if we wanted to understand ourselves, which, because also my PhD was looking at Bildung. So it seemed like the perfect opportunity to use philosophy to promote dialogue and also promote self-understanding and understanding within a community. I was also struck by a term that I'd seen come up lots while I was writing my literature review, which was meaning making, which took me right back to when I first qualified as a teacher in the early 90s, and somebody called Brunner. Because as I will show in a moment, when you take part in a Socratic dialogue, what you're doing is actually telling stories of your lives and experiences. My research is very messy. At the minute, I'm exploring meaning making as a concept, but meaning making in its simplest form is a process in which people make sense of life events, relationships, and the self, which is definitely what I thought happened in our project. So for those people not familiar, the Socratic dialogue that we used, and the one that most people that I meet are familiar with, is called the Leonard Nelson method of Socratic dialogue, that he delivered in a speech in 1922. So the method that we used has been around for 100 years, and I haven't really seen anybody making any big improvements on it. So if I explain the steps of the Socratic dialogue, this is how they work. Maybe we'll try these in the rooms. And we did this as a training session for teachers. So what you do is you choose a mutually agreed question from several choices or suggestions. You then share a story of experience connected to the question. I'll show you some of the types of questions in a moment. Now, the midwife of the dialogue, it comes from a Greek word called maieutik, I think is how you say it, is supposed to give birth to the conversation. That's why they're called the midwife. And that person who's leading the dialogue can clarify things. So after that moment of reflection, so each person shares a story of experience connected to the question, you then go around the group again. Now, in Socrates' time, they used to take part in these dialogues for days, trying to define what trust might be, or courage might be. We chose to keep our dialogues to 1 hour, approximately. There's one happening in a room next door right at this moment. And then finally, you don't have to come up with any kind of conclusion. You've summarized the dialogue. And if you can, agree some kind of definition from what everybody has said. So here's some examples of the types of questions that we chose. So if I just pick out a couple that were popular. In what ways is food more than just eating? Most tutors said that they enjoyed that conversation. And what is a home? What you'll notice is that all of these questions don't imply a correct answer, because that was the point, that this wasn't about, as Michael said, this wasn't about debate or coming up with any grand conclusion at the end. Nobody in the dialogue was right or wrong. This was about understanding and shared understanding. And if at the end of it, that shared understanding was that actually we see this differently, that was fine. But what we did find is that most people found more commonality than they found difference, remembering that most of these groups were multinational groups. This is a bit of blurb on data collection and analysis, which we couldn't possibly have collected all of the data from the hundreds of people who took part. So to try and come up, because I wrote a paper about this, is we tried to gather, well, we didn't try, we did. We gathered together a group of tutors and a group of learners, and we held a dialogue with them to find out what they felt they'd learned from the dialogues. So here's some of the things that they said. I'm not going to read out all of these. I've got lots of words on this PowerPoint because I intended sharing it with people. Michael's PowerPoint for a presentation was much better than mine, because one of the golden rules is not too many words on a PowerPoint. So, but the second one really stood out to me. It was so moving when he explained that he felt liberated to be able to talk freely about the situation in his country, whilst later commenting that he now comes regularly because he wants to talk with like-minded people. And I think what was important about a quote like that is that we have people coming from all over the world. And sometimes they've moved for economic reasons, but sometimes they've moved because they are fleeing war or persecution, depending on which country they come from. And we wanted these dialogues to be a space in which people could talk about those experiences and find meaning from those experiences. So, conclusions. Like all conclusions, hopefully these don't sound too grand, but we felt that using a very simple dialogical construct, which is the Socratic dialogues, we could talk about really big questions that had a big impact on people's lives. But my second conclusion is that almost everybody who took part in the dialogue agreed that they gained a sense of freedom from being able to talk about these things. So there was, besides the commonality and the coming together, there was an emancipatory aspect to it, that people felt free to express themselves and make meaning. So, which is why we've got the conversation still going now, even though the project actually finished last summer. And I think I've done about 15 minutes. So I think that's me. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Gary. This is really good, and I hope you can see the whole connection here between the theory of Socratic dialogue and the practice that Gary explains, and both Gary and Mikael explains. Now we are going to move on to the practical part, and this is where we're going to split out in small groups, and Mikael is going to tell us a little bit about what kind of ideas, what kind of discussions we could have, because now we can't do a full Socratic dialogue, Mikael. We don't have the time for that, but we'll be part of it. We'll have the question, I think, pretty much served to us. Could you tell us a little bit more?
Yes, I can. And in order to do so, I would like to share a document with you. As you can see here, I will also send it out in the chat so that everyone can download it and take it with you into the breakout room. Here it comes in the chat too. As you can see here on the screen, what we are going to do now is 3 steps of dialoguing. As Gary also mentioned, we don't have the time to do a full Socratic dialogue, but we have at least the time to go through 3 essential steps of the dialogue process. First, when you go into the breakout rooms, everyone is invited to share an experience where he or she once experienced good education, because this will be our question, as you can see on top of the document. What is good education based on our experience? Since we are quite many, probably not everyone will have the chance to share his or her experience, but it would be good to come up with something, even if it's just for yourself. In that first step, when you are remembering an experience when you once experienced good education, there will also be a group facilitator, a group leader. You choose that on your own in the group who should lead this dialogue process. And then the group leader asks who has an idea, who has an experience to share, and the first participant is presenting his or her experience. And the others can then ask questions so that everyone has a clear picture of what happened in that experience, of what happened in that situation. It's like seeing a movie in front of your inner eyes. So everyone should have a clear picture. If not, then just ask questions until everyone can imagine that experience. When everyone has a clear picture of it, then the group reflects on the following question. How does good education reveal itself in this experience? Where and how in this experience does good education come to expression? So, and here you already start to dialogue with each other. Where in that experience started good education to appear? How came it to the fore? How became it visible, so to speak? And by means of reflecting on that question, the group tries to come up with key themes that characterize good education in this example. So here you reflect upon about what is good education in that example, and how can we summarize that with key themes. For example, good education in this experience is when the relation between the teacher and the students is on an equal level. That could be like equality could be a key theme here. And after that step is done, another one in the group can share his or her experience. And the same procedure is done once again. In the last step then of this dialogue, the whole group reflects on whether and how the shared experiences are connected. Can you see a kind of red thread going through all these key themes, or through all these experiences? So as you see, it's not about now to come up with a conclusion what good education is. It's about experience sharing and seeing what it is, what kind of key themes there are that are relevant for good education in these experiences. So just take with you this document, decide who should lead the group, and then just reflect upon when did I experience good education once? And then the first one can start to share. I have to ask you, Johan, now it's 3:45. How long, how much time do we have for this breakout room session?
We have, we should be back here about 4:30, so maybe 40 minutes. Also, I would like to ask Yuri, I sent it to you on the chat, but we can take it verbally. I count to 11 that has said Ukrainians. Is it okay with one group, or do you want to make two?
I would make two.
Yes. What do you say, Yuri?
Yeah, okay, let's make two groups if possible.
Okay, because then we have these are the ones that were registered. I understand that not everybody has come today because they are waiting for the second session, but we can see if this works. If you see a group, you join it, and if they're very much unlike in size, maybe we can send a person to the other group. But these were two groups that we made.
Let's make 5 plus 6. Yeah.
Yeah. So we'll try to make it 5 plus 6. So if Janaina, if you make then these are groups 1 or 2, and then one group for Portuguese, and maybe 2 for English speaking. And if Gary and Mikael, if you want to join one of the English speaking groups each, maybe then we'll just let you be the leaders right now, so we don't use time for choosing leaders. Could those of us who wants to join an English speaking group try to look at how many there are, and then just choose, is that okay, instead of now starting to name people? Can we do that? And try to just see the size of the group and choose one that is. Then we need, as far as I can see, we need 5 groups, Janina. Would that be correct? Yeah. And group number 3 would be the one in Portuguese. And the English speakers can choose group 4 or 5, and we will be back here 2:30 Central European time.
Well, I'm creating the groups.
It is, I would so much like to hear each of you presented. I get so curious about everybody when we see you like this. But I hope we get time to talk later on. Groups and other circumstances. So groups 1 and 2, and you can find the groups in the chat. Should I put them in the chat, Mikael, or do you do it?
I have sent out the document with the groups in the chat.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, then we're joining the groups.
Yes.
Zoom will invite you to a specific group, but then you can choose which group you would like to join. So if you would like to join the Ukrainian groups, you could join rooms 1 or 2. And if you would like to join the group who's speaking Portuguese, so you could join group number 3.
Hello. So I think I will